Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel and to the latest episode of the CSFL Kickoff Show podcast. You've just got me today, Coach Fury, and the reason I'm here today really is not necessarily to do a typical show that we've done in the past where we talk about teams, results, performance. Today we're jumping on because there's been an exciting and interesting piece of news that's occurred in the CSFL over the past couple of days, and I thought I'd just jump on and just try and break down some of the rumours, discussions, and trying to sort of pick our way through what's occurring. So what has been happening? Well, for those of you who've been following the CSFL along, will know that we're experiencing a bit of a possible quarterback carousel in the sense that one of the league's best players, a quarterback, a pro bowler, champion, Cam Newton, is being made available by the Carolina Panthers. And well, this is huge, guys. I mean, a player that I never expected to be available to trade. I always assumed that the general manager of the Carolina Panthers, carousel, would keep Cam Newton until he retires. He is just a phenomenal quarterback. But not only is Cam Newton available, but the last 24 hours has surfaced even more rumours that the Denver Broncos, who have had a really tough start to the season, have also put Chase Daniel on the block, so another elite quarterback. And I thought, well, I'd just come onto the show today and just try and break down the strengths of these two quarterbacks and what teams possibly might be looking in the market for an elite quarterback, and what the differences are between the two, and try and just throw a few things out there, get some discussion going on the Discord server. So let's go straight away. Let's go back to the Carolina Panthers and just have a quick conversation about Cam Newton and what he kind of brings to a team. So Cam obviously was a first round pick several years ago now. He is rating wise a phenomenal quarterback. He can do pretty much everything. He can run, he can throw, he can hit accurate passes. And it's no surprise that he has been one of the very best quarterbacks in the league for many seasons now, putting up crazy good numbers. His actual numbers have kind of taken a little bit of a dip this season, but on paper, usually through the season, he comes out as being one of the best quarterbacks. His ratings usually there or thereabouts around 100. He normally is throwing plenty of touchdowns, can hit the long passes. You could probably see by this middle stat here. And his percentage numbers are fairly good considering the Carolina Panthers strategy is very much a long throwing game. So what does Cam Newton bring to a team? Well, he brings pretty much everything you'd want in a quarterback. The downside of Cam Newton is probably two things in my opinion. One is being that his contract is $15 million, which is a sizable amount of change to try and find for any team, considering most teams are up against the cap limits. And given that he is 29 years old, there is a question mark as to whether he starts to decline on his progression over the next several years, or whether he can maintain this elite status. And it's a bit of an unknown because in the CSFL, the regression and progression changes have been made this season. So it's the first season we're going to see some of the new features of Draft Day Sports Pro Football 22 kind of shine through. So at 29, he's locked down for $15 million. So it's a fair chunk of change. You'll basically be having him possibly through a couple more seasons of his elite performance, and then he may drop off. We haven't yet to determine whether that will actually happen or not, but that's an interesting thing. So you have Cam Newton, phenomenal elite quarterback, and then you've also got Chase Daniel, who's been made available. Chase Daniel is obviously slightly older than Cam Newton. What does he bring that maybe Cam Newton doesn't? Well, he's incredibly accurate and incredibly intelligent quarterback. He probably doesn't have the same type of arm or speed that Cam does, but he can bring that accuracy and the ability to kind of make the right play at the right call that maybe Cam necessarily might not be able to that same degree. So his rating, like no surprise with Denver player, again a similar style in terms of long passing game, but he can hit accurate passes, he can make the yardage, he can find the right players for the touchdown. His interception ratio is generally better than Cam's usually, given the play styles are generally fairly similar. The only thing I'd say is interesting is that his percentage is slightly lower than Cam, so maybe maybe that's something to factor in. But still a phenomenal elite quarterback on paper. Fantastic to get. The downside about Chase Daniel at this current moment in time is that he's only locked down to 1 year, which is just this season. So you're essentially taking a bit of a rental with him, unless you can entice him to re-sign with you, which is it's always a bit of a question mark. He also doesn't necessarily have the same type of leadership skills as Cam Newton, so that's always something to factor in when you think about a quarterback. Is that does tend to impact a little bit of the performance as well as the competitive rating, but the competitive rating for both is fairly good. So you are taking that punt that he is there for a season. He also is a little bit older, as I said, than Cam. So at 32, you're probably looking at making a decision as to whether you want him for this season or the next couple, and when you want to sort of gamble on, or maybe possibly a bit of regression from him, given that his arm is below 80 now. He probably is going to become almost like a sort of a pocket, sort of mid-range type of player. So it's whether you want that strategy or whether you're still expecting someone like Chase Daniel to hit those long deep balls, which maybe he might not be able to do in a couple of seasons. So this is really fascinating to try and break down, because you've got two elite quarterbacks who are openly on the market, who I never thought would be available. I always assumed Chase Daniel would retire in Denver. He's just been phenomenal for them over the seasons, been a key driving force for that crazy offensive game that they've had in past seasons. Likewise with Cam Newton, the cards were sort of stacked in Carolina's favour this year. They had everything on paper, receivers, the offensive line. Cam could basically have a phenomenal season, but for whatever reason, both GMs have decided to make them both available, which throws a fascinating prospect that since we saw Aaron Rodgers move last season, that these are probably the two best quarterbacks we've seen openly sort of discussed on the market, who are ready to sort of go into 18 now and probably be that elite performing quarterback that teams might necessarily want to find as a missing piece. So I thought I'd come on and break that down, but also just throw out a few teams that I think possibly could be after both of these players, and which one I think might be better suited to which team, just to get a bit of discussion going. So let's start with some of the teams that I feel like maybe have a little bit of a long shot in acquiring both, but maybe should be considering it. And the first team I'm probably going to start with on this one actually is a team that you're probably going to be asking, why on earth are you talking about this team? Because they're performing so well. Why do they need a quarterback? Well, let's try and break it down. So the Miami Dolphins are the team that I first looked at and thought, yeah, there's a shot here that they could be looking for a quarterback. And the reason I say this is, like, on paper, they've got two very, very good starter quarterbacks, in my opinion, in Colt McCoy and Chad Henne. They've been going with Chad Henne for most of the season, mainly I'm guessing because of his arm and accuracy, and the fact that McCoy has probably declined a little bit quicker than anticipated in some of those fronts. So on paper, it doesn't make sense for them both to sort of be considered moving. But the reason I say the Dolphins are in an interesting position for both of these quarterbacks is because Colt McCoy is being paid about $10 million. So the salary considerations of both can kind of be met with just moving the quarterback over. It does mean that the other team would have to take Colt McCoy's back-ended contract, but if you cut that, it's only a couple of million and it's not a huge thing. Colt McCoy is good enough. He could probably be flipped to a team that's probably desperate for any type of quarterback, maybe just a starter. And I still think that he's got legs in his game anyway. But the Dolphins being 4-1, they're having a fantastic start to the season, there's no doubt about that. But they're probably looking at that quarterback position, and I don't feel they're comfortable with Henne or McCoy. And I think that maybe a Cam Newton, in my opinion, is a really, really good fit for this team. He's locked down for multiple years. He's of the right age that he can come in and keep this 4-1 team alive and going, and probably lift them up from maybe being a wildcard playoff division sort of contender to maybe possibly competing with the bigger teams and the sort of the teams that are typically around the contention for the CSFL title. That possibly could be the mindset for the Dolphins, and I'd be interested to see whether they've engaged or had that discussion with the Panthers in particular. I don't feel like Daniel maybe makes sense for them because of the expiring contract, and he's probably not going to be able to give them much more beyond this season than a McCoy or Henne anyway. Whereas Cam, being a little bit younger, can probably just give them a couple of extra years of elite performance. So let's move on to the next team that I've got down here on my list. A team that I know has been widely circulated, sort of in discussions about both of these teams from the Discord server chat, and that is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And again, on the face of it, you're probably going, why on earth the Tampa Bay? Why should they be considering either? They drafted Jameis Winston recently, who's having a fairly good start to the season. His accuracy looks pretty good. His rating looks pretty good. But the reason I say this is a couple of things. They have cap room, so they've got $7 million to play with. They could roll the dice on someone like a Chase Daniel just to kind of see them over whilst Winston continues to develop. They also could throw in like an expiring of like a Wilson or something to kind of just get them over that couple of million that they would need. And I feel like it might be worth a little bit of a gamble for them. I mean, they're 1-3-1, so they've still got plenty of games left to go in the season. Their schedule, if I remember too right, is not too terrible towards the rest of the season. They've still got to play the Lions, the Saints, the Panthers, but they'd have to play them all. Played two of them anyway, because being in division. So there is an outside chance that they could be looking at someone like Chase Daniel and saying, maybe Winston isn't quite ready to lead us this season. He's developing. He needs that intelligence to probably come up a little bit. But maybe if we can just get Chase Daniel for a little rental for this season, he might just be enough, combined with some of our strategy and some of our development, to possibly give us an outside shot at that wild card. Considering that the Panthers are actively shopping Cam Newton, they may decline a little bit this season. They might not be at that sort of same performance that they have been historically. So that second sort of spot in the division is up for grabs, and probably looking at the rest of the national conference, there's probably an opportunity there for a wild card slot to maybe get in there with 9-10 wins. So it's certainly something they could be exploring. Let's move on to probably the second team I think possibly is in the hunt for both guys, I think. And that is the Arizona Cardinals. So on paper, this team just needs a quarterback, full stop. Any quarterback would be fine. They've got Kessler, they've got Enderley, who are serviceable. Weber's okay. But I mean, on paper, they necessarily could need that type of quarterback to maybe just take them to that next level. The question is being 1-4, and given the sheer turnover that this roster has had, it's really hard to grasp whether this team is necessarily a quarterback away from being a sort of wild card, sort of middle 500 team, or whether they need more development and more resources to probably get to that position. But I feel that on paper, the obvious choice for the Cardinals, if I compared Cam Newton and Chase Daniel, is probably Chase Daniel, because he's probably going to come at less of a price tag than Cam Newton, just because of the contract and the age, and sort of the progression discussion that I said at the beginning. So it might be worth taking a punt on him at sort of 10 million or so. They've got a salary they can basically throw into pretty much any deal. They've got plenty of positions, players, things that could be moved. And it might be worth them considering taking that little rental just to see if they did have that elite type quarterback, is that enough for this Cardinals team to make that jump? And if it isn't, they probably haven't spent a lot on actually making that happen in Chase Daniel. A rental for a year, see whether it works. If they really are still so far apart, then yeah, okay, there's a little bit of a lost gain in terms of acquiring him. But it means that probably they need to go back to the drawing board and maybe acquire some additional talent and additional position depth to maybe really compete, and then they know exactly where they are. But the final team, and probably the most obvious team that everyone is talking about that should be looking to try to acquire either of them, is the Cleveland Browns. So when your GM comes out and says, our defense has been fantastic, which it absolutely has been this season, but if only we had an elite quarterback, and then that would be the thing that would take us from being a 2 or 3 team at the moment to being a playoff team. And when your GM comes out and says that, whenever a elite quarterback becomes available, there's an obvious discussion as to, okay, well, they're obviously going to be going for him. The Browns have assets. They have salary they can move around to make some of these deals happen. They've got the opportunity to kind of make this. For me, I feel like the best fit is Cam Newton. It's $15 million. Of course, it's a huge amount of salary to pay up, which means they will have to take some cuts on some different positions, but they've got some depth available to kind of be able to do that. The question becomes how much of that balance between giving up assets and players and salary versus Cam Newton, does that really justify the spend out? It's really hard to tell. I mean, they're currently relying on Kirk Cousins, who on papers he's a starter quarterback, but he's not an elite quarterback. He's not been performing particularly well for them to begin this season, and that's probably why they are considering it. I think the only stumbling block between the Browns and Cam Newton is that salary. Chase Daniel and 10 million versus Cam Newton and 15 million. If you're looking for just a guy to come in and just basically put the performance in now, $5 million additional is quite difficult to try and find, especially when the Browns are up against the cap limit now at this moment in time. So I fully expect the Browns will be inquiring, as the other three teams I think will be, into either of these guys. But it's going to be fascinating to see, because if Cam Newton goes from the Carolina Panthers, and if Chase Daniel goes away from Denver and they both get traded, this could cause a really interesting set of QB sort of moves, because obviously Carolina have just traded in Matt Flynn and then that dealt him back off. It means that they're going to have to find someone to kind of just fill the hole for them now, unless they're going to be relying on what they have available at this moment in time, which is the likes of probably a Jack Ruddock or a Pat Devlin, probably not quite at the level that the Panthers would expect. Likewise, if Denver do end up finding a trade partner for Chase Daniel, are they going to be relying on a currently injured Carl Walton or a Tony Pike? They're probably going to be looking in the market for someone else, and it could cause some additional knock-on effects in terms of this quarterback carousel, sort of beginning with these two elite players and maybe driving down to some other players across the league. So it's going to be fascinating to watch. Who do you guys think Chase Daniel or Cam Newton are going to go to, and why? Be really interested to hear your thoughts and opinions, either here or on the Discord server. But it's going to be a fascinating watch to see what happens with this trade market that's just developed over the past sort of 24, 48 hours. As always, I'll be back with more episodes, more guests, more presenters, talk about different aspects of the CSFL as part of the Kickoff Show podcast. But for now, we'll see what happens to Cam Newton and Chase Daniel.